The day was Sunday in the morning, December the 4th, 2016. My wife and I realized that we were pregnant with what would become our third child. We weren't expecting this. We can't imagine life now without our little baby girl. She completed our family, baby Bo. We love her so much. She'll be 2 in June. But at that time, we had all these emotions and thoughts that were running through our mind. It's all the joy, but also all the fear and the worry that runs through your mind and accompanies pregnancy and birth and the first, moments of and days and weeks and months and years of life. But if you've been a parent before, then you know one of the other thoughts that we had. And that is that when you find out that kind of news, you start thinking about how much sleep you are about to lose, caring for and worrying about this new life. Parents of young children are not the only ones, though, who lose sleep at night. Adults of all kinds at various seasons of life for various reasons will lose sleep. And I wonder, what is it that keeps you up at night? Perhaps it's relationships or regrets or unrealized or unrealistic expectations or worries or work or fear or the future or choices that you have to face. Adults lose sleep over all kinds of things that have been done and things that have not been done, things that they can control and things that they cannot control. We live in an insomniac age in which I think our lack of sleep, our loss of sleep is a sign that something is off, that something's not quite right, that what abides at the center of life for many of us is a kind of redundant, warring restlessness that causes us to lose sleep. And if we can recognize that about ourselves, we are in a position to hear the good news of the gospel this morning. One day, near the beginning of Jesus' ministry, according to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus was teaching as he did by the Sea of Galilee when he pushed off from the crowds in a boat with his disciples out onto the sea in the night. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves began beating on the boat, so that the boat was already being overwhelmed and swamped. And as Mark tells the story, he says, but Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. Now, the story of Jesus' capacity to sleep in the midst of a storm at sea is one of those vivid moments in the Gospels. It's like the moments when we're told that Jesus wept, or that Jesus got angry, or that Jesus saw the rich young ruler and loved him. They're moments that are real and recognizable as human and natural. And here in Mark 4, we hear that Jesus slept. He fell asleep. Sleeping is one of those things that creatures do, but that God doesn't do, the scriptures tell us. Right from the very beginning of the book of Genesis, as we are first becoming acquainted with the first human being in the person of Adam, we see God causing a deep sleep to come upon and fall upon him. Adam sleeps. That's because he's a creature. God doesn't need to sleep. The psalmist puts it this way: the Lord who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. And so it's amazing then to find Jesus, who Mark has already proclaimed to be the divine Son of God, sleeping. Jesus sleeps, and the conditions are important. He doesn't just fall asleep. He sleeps in the middle of a great windstorm when the waves are beating and the waters are rushing over the edges of the boat. Now, to be sure, this is the kind of behavior that would have frightened his disciples. The disciples were not novices when it came to boats. They understood the patterns of the weather. They were professionals, at least some of them were, who made a living on the Sea of Galilee, who spent their life working around and on the sea. They had real experience and competence with these things, and so they knew what to do when the storm came up. They rushed around frantically, as one does, to try to keep the boat afloat, of course. Jesus, curiously, at least on the face of it, is probably one of the least likely to know what he was doing. He was from inland Nazareth. He was a carpenter and not a fisherman. And perhaps that helps us make sense of how and why Jesus falls asleep. Maybe he just doesn't appreciate the dangers of what is going on. He appears to sleep in blissful ignorance, not unlike a child who is unaware of the fact that the parents' world is falling apart. You can imagine a situation in which the mother's trying to keep the business going, or the father has received news of a diagnosis that's life-threatening, but they put on a brave face for the children, and the children sleep the easy sleep of innocence while the parents lie awake staring into the darkness, wondering what in the world they're going to do. Perhaps the sleep that Jesus sleeps is the sleep of innocence, like the sleep of Adam in the Garden of Eden, the deep sleep which the Lord God causes to fall upon him, in which he had nothing to fear. There was seemingly no chaos against which frantically he had to defend himself or safeguard himself. It's that that was humanity's first sleep, the sleep of a child. The security of the knowledge that God was providing for him, that the deepest desires that he had were things that God was setting out to be concerned about. The question, though, is how could you possibly sleep like that now, in a world that is fallen and damaged and devastated? How could you sleep such innocent sleep when you've lost your innocence, the innocence of Eden and the innocence of childhood? Insomnia, it seems to me, it's one of those things that's a malady, an affliction of the modern era. It often seems like a great part of the human race lies asleep at night, staring in the dark, trying to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to keep their lives or the world around them afloat. We've never had so much technical ability, so much competence to control our environment, but we've also never been so aware of our own fragility and inability to control the world around us. In the words of Ben Quash, the words on millions of lips and passing through millions of minds are the words that the disciples utter. We are perishing here. Wake up, Jesus. Do you not see that the winds and the waves and the waters are rising up around my neck? Do you not see that we're losing control here? Do you not care, they say, that we are perishing? Is that why Jesus is asleep? Is he asleep because he's naive of the danger? Is he asleep because he just doesn't care? No. There's something else going on in the story. It's not that Jesus sleeps as an expression of naivete. It's not that he sleeps as an expression of carelessness. It's that what's going on with Jesus is deeper than that. Jesus sleeps as an expression of peace, deep peace. Jesus isn't under the illusion that he lives in a world that is innocent. He's not under the illusion that he's still in the Garden of Eden. He knows the cost of being a part of the devastated and damaged world. Later in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the story that we'll tell next week, or in 2 weeks, it's precisely Jesus who stays awake while everybody else sleeps. It's Jesus who's staring into the darkness, who's wrestling with what it seemed like he must do to keep the world afloat. It's Jesus who on that night would stay awake in order that everybody else could sleep. It's Jesus who stays awake in order to look eyes wide open into the world's devastation and to find there a task that only he, the obedient one, could perform. He stayed awake so that others could sleep trustfully again in his faithfulness. He opens up this way of life that's different, that gives his followers this blessed assurance that could not be given any other way, that death and chaos and devastation and damage cannot finally prevail, that in the end, they will not ultimately perish. Jesus is on a mission, and his mission is to restore lost innocence. On that day in the boat, in the storm on the Sea of Galilee, it's as if you could read it as an early sign of the new life that Jesus has come to open up for his followers, a sign of the restoration of human beings through the life and death and resurrection. It opens up this kind of reconstruction of something, a glimpse into a different kind of sleep, not the sleep of innocence, but the sleep of a kind of restored innocence, which is promised to those who would trust in the faithfulness of God and follow Jesus. Ultimately, Jesus would stand in our place. As Ben Quash puts it, he would stay awake so that others might sleep. But in this story, Jesus sleeps for us. He gives us an example of how to sleep in the midst of the storm, how to rest in light of our redemption. He gives us this example of how to sleep because we know that God is for us and not against us, because God is faithful, because this is the God who holds the whole world in his hand. This is the God who created the world and its foundations upon the sea and made it firm upon the deep of the waters. Jesus' sleep, it's a proclamation of what Jesus has come to bring us. What has Jesus come to bring us? Nothing less and nothing more than a peace which passes all understanding, and a peace that finally can abide. My peace I give to you, he will say. My peace I will leave with you. I've said these things that you may have joy, that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be complete. Peace and joy, these are the things that Jesus promises to bring. They're promised not just because they're up ahead. They're promised because they're ultimate. They're promised because they're the deepest truths of the world. They're the world's beginnings and they're the world's good end. And every once in a while, we get a glimpse of them. I think of that moment at the end of Cormac McCarthy's The Road when he paints this image of brook trouts running in a mountain stream somewhere out there in the Smoky Mountains. You can see them standing, he writes, in the amber current with the white edges of their fins wimpling softly in the flow. They smell of moss in your hand. In the deep glen, he writes, where they live, all things were older than man, and they hummed in mystery. Peace and joy, these things were there at the beginning, and they will be there at the end. And every once in a while, you get a glimpse of them breaking through in the present. That the fullness of God that created all things good is also the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our great shepherd of the sheep as the great guarantor of what is ultimate in this world and what is final in this world and what is restored to us who follow Jesus and who give our life to trusting in the faithfulness of God. It's a ground from which to live in this world, from which to work and to rest and to sleep. Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? They said. He woke up, Mark tells us, and rebuked the wind. And he said to them, peace, be still. And as the story was told, then the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. It was a sign and a glimpse of what finally abides. Now, this is what I know from my own life, is that every once in a while, I want to believe that story to be true. I want to believe that in the beginning there was peace and joy, and at the end there will be peace and joy. But I confess that at times I wonder and doubt. And it's just at those moments when I feel like the story is untrue that a glimpse will come. So I was a senior in high school, and I woke up in the middle of the night from a terrible dream. I don't remember the contents of this dream, but I do remember how I felt. The weight of the devastated and damaged world just hovered over me. The darkness hovered over me, and I couldn't go back to sleep. I just tossed and turned, and I stared into the night, and I got up to go to the restroom, as one does. And I noticed downstairs there was this light coming from the living room. And I had become aware at this point that my father, some nights, would wake up in the night, that he couldn't sleep always. He struggled to sleep through the night. I had become aware of some of the ways in which I was causing my father difficulty in sleeping. I was becoming aware of the storms and the winds and the waves of adulthood that were stealing his sleep. I knew that the light was a sign that he was awake also. I went downstairs, and I never will forget what I saw that night. I didn't remember it for a long time, but I remembered it this week. At the center of our house that night, in the middle of a sleepless night, my dad had lit every single candle that we had in the house. And the light from those candles pierced the darkness of that night. And I went down, and I was overcome. I was weeping, and I embraced my father on the couch. And I tell you the truth, Jesus Christ woke up and rebuked the dark forces that were devastating and damaging the world around us. And on that night, there was peace, and there was stillness. And the worry and the anxiety ceased. And there was in our household deep, profound calm that I've never forgotten. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.